This is episode 105 of the Planet LP podcast. Hi there, I'm Ted Asregadoo, and we're getting to the end of 2024. We will be doing an episode in December of Planet LP's top LPs and songs of 2024. So that's coming up soon. But I wanted to take this episode and spotlight some books I've been spending some time with. This episode is called Books That Rock, and it is kind of hearkening back to when I first started this podcast. Hard to believe, but it was 2021. The early days of the podcast when I used to recommend books. It wasn't just music books. Sometimes they were short stories, sometimes they were novels, and sometimes they were non-music related nonfiction. The difference, though, between then and now is that these books that we're going to talk about are all about music and musical artists. And with me to recommend some of the books that rock is Jeff Giles. Jeff is a published author whose latest novel, and I have it right here, called Langley Powell and the Society for the Defense of the Mundane. You can get that wherever you buy your books, which some people buy them online. Some people buy them at bookstores. You could buy them from Humorous Books. That's who publishes it on their website. Jeff is also the co-host of the Record Player podcast with his brother in arms, Matt Wardlaw. And I've been listening to that pretty regularly. Good deep dive into records and larger conversations about music with folks who also record music sometimes. So, with that, let's dive into these musical memoirs, shall we?
Sure, let's do it.
Jeff Giles, welcome back to the Planet LP podcast.
Thank you, Ted. I'm always excited to get an invitation to come on this show.
Always happy to have you on here. You're a reader. I'm a reader. Maybe some Planet LP folks out there are readers as well. And maybe they're looking for some titles to delve into that almost 100% tilt towards music. And I have a stack of 6 books. About 3 of them I've already talked about on this podcast. So I'll just briefly recommend those. I think you've got 3, and I've got another pile of like 5 that are yet to be read.
And they're all rock books.
They're all kind of, all music-related rock books. I'll see what I can get to on those. I'll probably just do sort of a lightning round. Have you read this? Have you read that? But why don't we start with you since you are the guest? Why don't you take your first book?
I'll tell you what I'm currently reading. I just started it last night, and it's the Randy Newman biography, which is called A Few Words in Defense of Our Country. And if you know me at all, you know I love Randy Newman.
You do?
I'm a big fan, and I was very excited to see this coming out. And, like I said, I just started it, but so far I am enjoying it a great deal. One of my big issues with rock books in general, and one of the reasons I think I only gave you 3, is that I think it is deceptively difficult to stick the landing for a rock book for a variety of reasons. I think the memoirs often don't match the voice or the energy of the artist in a way that I want them to anyway, or sometimes they're just dull. So
yeah, they can be. they can be, really. I'm not kidding. Yeah.
And also sometimes, I'm thinking of the Clapton memoir in particular. Sometimes they are just, whether intentionally or otherwise, they reveal themselves to be rather gross. That's how I felt after reading Clapton, and also, not a book, but the David Foster documentary. Sometimes they're just people that you realize, like, I've enjoyed listening to some of what you've done, but maybe I would not want to share an elevator with you or have a beer with you. And so anyway, for all those reasons, I think sometimes it's kind of hard. You see, like, I love this artist. There's a book out about them. I have to read it. And then it's just kind of it's less than some of its parts. But so far, the Randy Newman book, I am loving it.
You know, when I had Jason Hare on the podcast, we were talking about Pete Townshend's music, and both Jason and I are real fans of his music. But one thing that I've known about Pete Townsend just from reading about him through the years is he's a difficult person. He can be not a nice guy. He can just be this explosive kind of ball of rage, just, randomly. And Jason got to meet him a couple of times. And he
Jason's got
talked
some
about,
stories.
he does have some stories. And I was like, huh, has this
Yeah.
sort of changed your view of his music? And he said, I don't think it has. I think he's still a fan of his music. But it reminds me of that old phrase, right? Never meet your heroes,
Never
because
meet
they'll
your
always
heroes. Yeah.
disappoint you.
And I
I
think
don't know
that
if that's the
that's
case for
like,
everybody, but
I know the stories that you're talking about. I'm not sure I would be able to be as charitable as Jason has been. I
yeah.
think it would, I don't think I'd be able to help having my experience colored after that. But sure, you've interviewed a bunch of people, rock stars are just as prone to being regular jerk offs as the rest of us.
Yep.
The temptation is to put them on a pedestal. That is unwise. And I'm not excusing Mr. Townsend's behavior at all, but yeah, that's definitely out there.
Yeah. Speaking of difficult people, my first pick comes from, it's a 2021 memoir that was written by Sinead O'Connor.
Yes.
After she died, I was kind of bummed out. I mean,
Yeah.
I like her music, but I was never a huge fan. But for some reason, it affected me, and I thought, oh, it's because she's roughly my age. I mean, I think
You think that's what it
we were
is?
born like maybe a year apart or two, maybe thereabouts. But so I was thinking, like, dang, am I next? I don't know. It just that kind of like, you would expect people in their 70s and 80s to, to
Yeah.
sort of pass to the great beyond, but somebody that dies sort of suddenly like this, it's sort of like, wait, what? She was in her 50s. So I
I thought
picked
you were
up,
going to say it really hit you hard because she had such a rough go of it. She had
well, that too, but I didn't know much about her
yeah.
background. I mean, I liked a couple of her albums. I liked a lot of her songs. But
Yeah.
when one day I went to, there's a kind of a tragic story. I'll hold up the bookmark. East Bay Booksellers. They are in the Rockridge area of Oakland. And I usually go there with my wife, Julie, and my daughter, May, and we just go book shopping because it's really well curated books. And I saw this one there on the shelf, and I thought, oh, let me read that. I mean, she had already passed away. And the tragic part of the story for the bookstore is it burnt down.
God.
I know, it's not after I bought the book, but but they had a fire. It wasn't in the bookstore itself. I don't think it may have been on the top floor, but it just basically, they have to demolish the building. There's a good outcome of this. This place has actually found another storefront a few blocks up the street, still in Oakland, still in the Rockridge area. They're going to be there for a short period of time while they try to find another place because this one's a little bit too small. Anyway, that's East Bay Booksellers. That's their story. Sinead O'Connor's story is
does not
one
end as
that.
happily.
What's that?
It does not end as happily.
It
The
does
bookstore
not. No.
rises from the ashes, but
Yeah, I mean, this is a person who had a lot of controversy as a public figure, and
yeah.
you just glean from the pages of this book how contrarian she was throughout her life. And it's not an easy read. In fact, in some ways, as I was reading this, it was almost as if a small child was writing this. The prose was very, very compact. Sentences were short. The details were very sort of fragmented in some parts. But the best chapter is when basically Prince attempted to beat the crap out of her at his house and then chased her around a parked car and then went looking for her as she fled from his house in Los Angeles. But I've only heard her talk about this. I've never heard anybody else sort of, because they were the only two in the room apparently, talk about this particular part of her life and her interaction with Prince. But it's detailed in the book, and I was looking at some videos of Sinead O'Connor, and she said that's her favorite chapter. She likes it. She thinks it's probably the most powerful chapter of the book. So, yes, Rememberings is the name of this one, Sinead O'Connor. So
she, like you, is an artist that I was never a huge fan of, and I didn't really think about her very much. But after, or I think toward the end of her life, when you found out more about like her son's life and all the various mental health struggles that she had, it made me look back on the way she was treated in the early 90s. It was a different time, and it was a lot easier to treat celebrities like piñatas back then. She kind of had a raw deal, you know. She
She
had
did.
a hard hand dealt to her, and the way she was treated after that SNL stuff was pretty unfair.
Yeah, and I had Annie Logan, another Prop Dose alumni, and we were talking about Sinead O'Connor after she had died, and she said, I think people miss the point about why she ripped up the picture of the Pope.
Oh yeah,
I mean, and
by a wide
of
margin,
course,
yeah.
and she's proven right,
Yeah.
later
Yes.
when what was it, was it Boston Globe that did that
Yes.
story? Yeah.
Yeah.
About the priests sexually abusing children.
Yes.
So that's really what she was trying to bring awareness to. But apparently that picture of the Pope was her mother's. And after she had the picture after her mother died, and she thought that she would just rip it up and on national television in the United States. And look where that led. Yeah, it didn't go well.
You've read this book. I have not. I feel like often people who present themselves as being very confrontational, strong, willing to provoke, speak truth to power. Often they are some of the most fragile people internally. Is that the impression that you get from?
Yeah, I think she alternates between being very defiant, kind of middle finger person, and then being this very, as you said, fragile person on the inside that she breaks easily. And I think that she kind of swings between some poles. She may have been sort of, manic depressive. I don't know, but a lot of creative people are. But again, it's sort of a tragic figure, but that's, it was weird. I guess I never thought that the death of a celebrity, which usually doesn't bother me at all, but with Sinead O'Connor, it's like, man, I'm kind of bummed out here. It's like, dang. Oh, well. Hopefully this next one will lift our spirits. Your next pick?
I think the next one I have on the list is Nothing But a Good Time, which lives up to its title. Have you read this one?
I have not. No, it does look good.
Ted.
Yeah.
Oh, it's so good. It's like book candy. Once you start reading it, you're just going to inhale it. It's an oral history of essentially the whatever you want to call it, hair metal, glam rock, the Sunset Strip scene from the 80s. So there are interviews with all the people that you would expect. It's been a while since I read it, but I'm going to go out on a limb and say there are probably interviews with Don Dawkin and Janie Lane and Kip Winger and all the other, the guys from Rat, all the luminaries, Poison. It is an absurdly fun read. It has, I said, I think it's hard for rock books to capture the energy of the art that they're trying to discuss. And this book does not have that problem at all. And from what I recall, it also, for the most part, skirts the worst of the underbelly of that scene. It is not going to leave you feeling a little sick to your stomach the way watching the Penelope Spheris Decline of Western Civilization Part 2. You're not going to have a moment like the guy from Wasp drinking an entire bottle of vodka in his pool while his mother looks on, that kind of thing. It's really, you can't talk about that music without addressing that in some form, but really it is just a lot of fun. It is a very, very entertaining book. And if you read it and you want more and you have Paramount Plus, they just aired a 3-part docu-series that is essentially an adaptation of this book. They cover pretty much the same stuff, but you see people on camera talking about the things they did instead of just reading it. So yeah, cannot recommend that one highly enough. It is so much fun to read.
I think I might have mentioned this on the podcast, but when I first started college, I think maybe I was a sophomore. It might have been my freshman year or sophomore year. I was at a junior college, but I briefly dated a woman whose boyfriend was Stephen Piercy from Rat.
What?
Yes. Just for a little bit. I mean, we went out maybe on 3 dates, and she told me one day, she says, "You know that song Round and Round?" I said, "Yeah, Rat."
Oh my God.
Yeah, that's my ex-boyfriend. I said, "What?" Are you kidding me? She's all like, no. I said, how are you here in Northern California? She says, I used to live in Southern California. I was a model down there, and and we met. And she says, you know what? And maybe this is, maybe it's revealed in that book, but he was never really a fan of that genre. He liked Bauhaus. He wanted to be like that band, just this sort of gothy, really dark and moody kind of stuff. She says, yeah, he was never really into the whole rat thing. It's paying the bills.
Wow.
So yeah.
Wow. And now he's been doing it for 40 odd years.
Well, now he loves it. Maybe the money started coming in, but his true passion was goth,
Wow.
Yeah.
All right. Well, now you really have to read it.
I will. Yes, I'm putting that one on my list. It'll add to my pile of books that I've got that are music related that I'm trying to get through, and I've gotten through a lot of them. So I'm gonna shotgun these two because I've already done podcast episodes on them, and it's no surprise here. There's Geddy Lee's My Effin' Life, which was really, really great. I mean, I love this book. I thought that, and I've read all of Neil Peart's books that he's written.
I was just going to interrupt you to ask, have you read all of the, okay. So
yes,
you've read all
everything even the novels that he's done, the Clockwork. Yeah. I just finished Clockwork Destiny, the third of the trilogy, which it was okay. The best one was the second of the three, but My Effin' Life, I don't know. Geddy should do more writing. He should do more of this sort of biographical writing because he's very good at it. People that were growing up with Rush in the 70s and part of the 80s, they might not have known that he was Jewish. Maybe, I don't know, because of his name, Geddy Lee. It's not necessarily, they may have known that his real name was Gary Lee Weinrib, but he talks about his family, about how the Holocaust played such a big dark cloud over his family, how they came to Canada before he was born. His family came to Canada, his mom and dad, just kind of a safe harbor, and allowed the children to grow up in relative freedom. And he was able to do that. He dropped out of high school. He joins a band, has a 40-plus year career with this band and does really well for himself. But yes, I think that this is definitely, it was on the New York Times bestseller and rightly deserved. I thought this was just a fantastic read. I
can only imagine you bought that the day it came out.
Yeah, I had it on pre-order. So. Of course, yeah. I mean, anything Rush, it's gonna. And he's actually got a new book that's coming out in 2025. It's about his baseball memorabilia. It's called 72 Stories, and it's about. I mean, I don't know if you know this, but he is a collector of autographed baseballs, mostly from the Negro Leagues. That is coming out in 2025. They put it on their website, and so that's his next big project. The next one I'm going to recommend is this one by Bono, Surrender. 40 songs, one story. I liked half of this book a lot. I thought that the first half was just fantastic. All right. And this happens with rock memoirs. I'm sure you've done as you go through some of them. You think, wow, this is really good. And then somehow you cross that midway point and it's almost like they've run out of material or they forget everything. The closer they get,
there's the ones that make you read about their childhood, you know, and you have to spend 100 pages. Like, I don't care where you went to grade school. Let's get to the good stuff. So it can go either way. But yes, I know what you're saying.
He's done that. He does talk about his childhood, but I found it kind of fascinating because his mother died when he was very young. And he was like a teenager, and that really affected him. And so it just kind of shows how that trajectory fed into U2. But as it got into sort of closer to the present, I just found he had run out of gas on it. But the first half, man, that was really good. So those are my two. Those are my two recommendations.
So wait, are you good with it up to what, Octung?
Yeah, around Octung, baby. Okay. And then things start getting a little bit like, nah, that's all right.
Were you still a fan after Octung Baby, or was that when your enthusiasm started to wane for the music as well?
Well, the album Pop was a difficult one to listen to.
For a lot of people, yeah.
Yeah, I was almost ready to give up on the band, but then, they came out with the album that had Beautiful Day on it. Is it All That You Can't Leave Behind or something? Yeah.
Very good, yes.
And I thought that they kind of redeemed themselves, and then they stayed. They realized that they better get out of that lane and start getting back into what people expect out of the band. And then the album that iTunes dumped into everybody's library. I didn't think it was that bad. I didn't think it was that good either. But the one
Right.
after that
Same.
was a lot better. Is it Songs of Innocence and Songs of Experience?
Yeah. I'm not sure I've listened to either of those, but yeah.
Yeah, but you're not missing a heck of a lot. But they're fine. It's just that kind of they're all right. It's just here's a band that's kind of past its prime in a way. They've got a few more songs, but they don't have good albums left in them. And I probably am pissing off a lot of U2 fans, but by saying that, but it just seems like after some time, there's just not a lot of gas left in the tank for songwriting. And then it just feels like you're just doing sort of warmed over U2 or something.
I think I feel that way too, but I feel like you can palpably feel that band straining for relevance, straining for the degree of cultural saturation that they had at their peak, and it detracts from the music. For me, you don't get the sense that they're making the music that they really want to make. You get the sense that they are trying to cater to ghosts of the past, or however you want to phrase it. They're trying to recapture something. I think that if they were able to shake that off and maybe make some more unexpected music, some more intimate music, they might sound a little more you might feel like there was more gas in the tank. I don't know. I guess I'm not curious enough to read that book, but my curiosity would be to what degree Bono talks about that feeling of reaching the highest peak in the mountain and then spending the rest of your career knowing that you're not ever going to make another Joshua Tree or another Octung Baby. You're always going to be in the shadow of what you did before. That to me is interesting. And I don't know how you cope with that. It doesn't seem like they're doing a very good job of it.
No, I mean, they've certainly have no problem filling the Sphere in Las Vegas.
Right.
That was a pretty successful run for them. I mean, they were there for over 3 months, weren't they? I think.
Yeah, but why are people going? Right? What do they want to hear?
They want to hear the hits.
Yes,
of course. They don't want to hear the. And this is one's from our new album.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
yeah. I think that they realize that they're a greatest hits band at this point, but
which is tough. I feel I don't know how you deal with that. I don't know how you keep going with that hanging over your head.
They've made their mark in the musical landscape. I mean, they are one of the top bands that people will mention as a favorite, and their music will endure, and younger people will discover their music at some point. And I don't think it's going to go away. I think it's going to be there, especially the early albums. Those are the classic ones, and those are the ones that I think are going to have legs and keep going.
I think you're right.
Yeah,
it's just that certain acts, they get to the place where they don't need another hit, and they think, great, I can do whatever I want. There's your Bob Dylan or whatever, And then there are bands who continue to reach for that brass ring. And on some level, I think that's admirable, but I do think that it also impacts the music. And this is one case where I think you can hear it happening.
I should hold up this one as an example of a sort of a greatest hits band. It's
there it is.
Nick DeRizzo's great encyclopedic Journey, Worlds Apart. I love this one. And I did have Nick on the podcast and he talked about the book. I also wrote a review of the book, so you can read that on Pop Dose if you want to. And
I read that one as well.
Was that it is a cautionary tale about ambition, conflict, and the double-edged sword of success. And that's the way I look at Journey.
That's a fair summation. It is also very long. You were not kidding when you said it's encyclopedic. That book is very long.
He did a fantastic job putting this together.
He did. If you want to read about Journey, if you care about Journey, you're going to get everything you're looking for in this book. It is encyclopedic, like you said.
Yes. I like Journey. I mean, I like some of their music. Again, I'm sort of a Fairweather fan, maybe greatest hits kind of person. I just found this fascinating because I'd forgotten how many permutations the band had gone through from the early days, where they were kind of a fusion, kind of proggy band in a way. I don't know what you would call it, but they did a lot of, I mean, they had vocals, but they had some straight up proggy music. And I'm all like, this is Journey? And I went back and I listened to those early albums, and then of course, then you get the greatest hits period with like the Steve Perry uh, era, and then the after Steve Perry, where it's just sort of like, yeah, you got these albums. I mean, this singer that sounds a bit like Steve Perry, and he's good. He's got the pipes, but is this the interesting part of the story? And Nick actually does make it kind of interesting because there's,
Yeah.
I don't know, it's volatile. It really is a volatile relationship. Yeah.
That's an understatement. Anybody who pays attention to rock news knows that even if you don't think the Journey's music is interesting, the headlines are captivating during this era. It's ridiculous what these guys are doing to each other. I was never a fan. I'm still not really a fan, but I read that book and it made me want to listen to Journey's greatest hits. So that is the biggest endorsement that I think I can possibly offer any rock book. You know, if you read it and it makes you want to listen to the music, then it's done its job. And that's what Nick did.
Yeah. Well, that's good. That's good. Well, let's go with yours. I shotgun at 3 and we took some time on that, but.
Well, you brought 6 and I only brought 3. So
I know
it doesn't make sense to alternate. It's called Can't Slow Down. I don't have the full title in front of me. You might.
Here it is. Can't Slow Down. How 1984 Became Pop's Blockbuster Year by Michelangelo Matos.
Yes. And I turned 10 that year. So for me, a book about pop culture of 1984 is catnip. And so I bought that, sight unseen, very eager to read it. Obviously I'm biased because I was there and I was a kid and I was entering my formative years as an active music consumer. But I do think there's an argument to be made for that year being kind of special. You had Prince in his imperial phase. You had Springsteen. You had Madonna. You had who am I missing?
Wasn't U2's Unforgettable Fire that year, or was that 85? Am I blanking on what year that came out?
I don't know. Joshua Tree was 87, so I'm sure there was something happening around that time. Yeah, there was Cyndi Lauper. There were massive soundtracks.
Yeah, Unforgettable Fire was 84. It was October 1st.
There you go. Yeah. There was Ghostbusters. There was Beverly Hills Cop. There's this series of atom bombs that went off on the charts. I was really eagerly anticipating the book. I like it with some significant reservations. I feel like the author goes out of his way periodically to take some fairly cheap and unnecessary pot shots at artists that are not considered cool. It left a bad taste in my mouth. I think if you're going to write a book about how the music of this era is uniquely impactful or good, then you should stand behind it and not, try to, I felt like he was trying to demonstrate his rock cred in certain parts, and it was just unnecessary. But it's still an interesting read. And, particularly if you were of that era and you have not read the book, I highly recommend it.
I think 1984 was a fantastic year for music. I don't know of another year where you had that many sort of not groundbreaking, but just monumental albums that have stood the test of time. They're still around. They're still considered classics. Maybe you could flash forward to 1994, perhaps. I don't know, somewhere in that era. But it seems like that the stars really aligned for a lot of artists that year, and they were doing some of their best work. Whether it was an early album in their career or a mid-career album that signaled that they were in it for the long haul, that they weren't a relic of the 70s or something. Like I think of like a Bruce Springsteen, who never sort of lacked for fans, but he just sort of never really crashed over into that mainstream until Born in the USA. I know that The River had Hungry Hearts and stuff, but I mean, and it probably went top 10 or maybe top 20. I remember I was doing high school radio at that point, and I remember playing it and thinking, what's so great about this guy? I don't get it. So,
a question that Ted continued to ask for the rest of his radio career. you hit on something that I talk about. I have talked about this for a long time, which is that period, the sort of graybeard rockers were not yet old enough to have been pushed off top 40. And so there was a long period when kids and their parents essentially shared the top 40. And, I was just talking to some people who are older than me about Jethro Tull's Aqualung.
Yeah.
And also about Aerosmith's Love in an Elevator. And somebody made a comment like, what did our parents think when we were, singing along to this stuff? And I said, our parents listen to that stuff too. They had the early records in their collection. You had artists like Linda Ronstadt, you had artists like Chicago, Starship, Heart. There were all these groups that had long careers, and in some cases they really drastically reinvented themselves to remain commercially relevant. In fact, in most cases they did. I'm thinking about like Aretha Franklin returning to the top 40, or John Fogerty coming back. So there were a lot of these acts that they had a lot of I don't know if I would call it crossover appeal, but if they had a hit, they were going to bring in younger fans, but there were also older fans that remembered their earlier work. And I think we have lost that monoculture. So I think there's a case to be made for 94, but there also at that point things had started to splinter a little bit. Mm-hmm. And Nirvana conquered the world, but I think not in the same way that Born in the USA did, in that everybody heard Born in the USA. Everybody heard An Innocent Man. Everybody heard Like a Virgin.
Right.
Grunge was huge and multi-platinum, but there were still pockets of the audience that were not tuning into that stuff. So yeah,
no, I think
I agree.
That's astute. I think that sounds about right. I'd say that part of what united generations was AM radio and top 40 FM radio. AM radios, I can't remember which Beastie Boy it was talking about it, but he said, man, when I was growing up, you heard all sorts of stuff on AM radio. You heard country, you heard soul, you heard rock. You would hear like instrumentals, like you think, what is this? And I just feel like that kind of made its way into the hip hop culture, that what they are sort of reflecting back is being raised on that kind of radio where it's just sort of whipsawing around with just these genres, and they just play it all. Not all of it good, but they're playing it.
No, I agree with that completely. And that's why in the wake of the grunge revolution, or whatever you want to call it, you had like there was that tribute album to the Carpenters. There were these uber hip artists that you wouldn't necessarily suspect would have these kind of gooey little pop pockets in their DNA, but they did because of exactly what you're talking about. And I think that ship has sailed. We're not going to get the monoculture back, and everything has been really atomized. However, I do get the feeling from my kids that streaming has made it possible, and also maybe more likely for younger listeners to explore everything. And maybe some of that AM radio spirit remains to an extent.
Maybe. Well, I've got a couple left here on the pile, and I'll get to them fairly quickly. We were talking about the year 1984. That was the year that this band hit big with their first album all over the place. Yes. And that is the Bangles. The Bangles.
My first concert.
What's that? That was your first
concert?
Wow. Nice. Was it in 84?
86. They would have been on tour behind Different Light.
Yeah. So their big album, big album. Yeah. This is a book called All Over the Place, The Rise of the Bangles from the LA Underground, written by Eric Shade. This is a fun read because one of the things about the Bangles, I think, that gets a little bit overlooked, because as they became more popular, they became, I guess, more controlled by their label, and they really wanted to accentuate the cuteness of them or the hotness of them, mostly Susanna Hoffs. and
Yeah.
downplay their musical chops, which they were really dedicated to. I mean, they were one of those bands that understood the kind of inheritance they were getting from the 60s. They were very taken by the Byrds. They were very taken by a number of these bands from the 60s that they grew up as young girls listening to, but then as young adults folded that into their music. And I do like the Bangles music, but I appreciated them way more after reading this and seeing how hard they worked to get to where they are. And I think part of it, it's also a good read for anyone who's getting into the music business. It's important to know what sort of hazards exist, what sort of snakes and arrows, what sort of lizards and con men are out there. And you get a lot of that in this book. I know the music industry is different, but some of those same people are still there. So I think that this is a good sort of must read for a young artist just starting out. And then finally, my last one is Steven Wilson's limited edition of One. This is one of those artists where like, who's this guy? Steven what? Steven Wilson is I don't know, he's got like a billion bands, but he's mostly known, one as a solo artist, two is the leader of a prog band called Porcupine Tree. But now he's really made
get to it. This is what I'm waiting for. Yes.
As a remixer of classic rock albums. He does these Atmos remixes, and that's, you know, a 360 mix of an album that you just get you get the full treat, sonic treat of it. But this is where I think he makes his money, but in his art, he doesn't sell a lot of albums. But I got to tell you, of all the rock biographies I've read this past year, this one was probably the best written and the best formatted. If I'm getting this right, you know, how he kind of lays it out.
Yeah. Because
he doesn't do the standard thing, which you had criticized earlier, which is, you know, here I am at 4 years old riding my tricycle. And that was my first sense of rhythm because of the pedaling of the trike or something like that. You know, he doesn't do that. He goes around to different periods of his career and sort of parachutes in. And I reviewed this book for Pop Dose, and what I noted is, I said at the end, I said, "Will you enjoy this biography?" I said, "It's a qualified yes. Wilson is aware his music has a limited appeal and his life isn't exactly rock star-ish. He doesn't drink, do drugs. He has a deep love for animals, being a vegan. But these choices woven into the fabric of his life bring him immense satisfaction as a married man in his mid-50s with stepchildren. This family life, in a way, has replaced the yearning for big-time fame." He does talk about that. In fact, he jokes that if Porcupine hit Led Zeppelin levels, he'd probably be face down in a guitar-shaped swimming pool. So that's kind of how he knows that there's some trappings there within the rock world. But it's really well written and quite funny too. And he has a lot of lists. He likes to make lists of certain favorite songs. Like he has his top 10 favorite Steven Wilson songs, of which he has 11. So, you know, he's got a little funny. So those are my books.
I think you have a degree of freedom when you're at his level. You don't have to be all things to all people, and you can write the book that you want to write and not worry about satisfying the, you know, 10 million potential buyers. So it doesn't surprise me that was the one that really resonated with you.
Yeah, I think I would like to interview him for the podcast, but he's got his own podcast and busy with his billion projects. So I don't think he has got time to sit down with any small time podcasters in the San Francisco Bay Area.
You should ask anyway.
What's that?
All right. Well, try again.
Yeah. At the time they said, "Oh no, Steven's working on his book." I'm not, well, the book's out. So maybe he will.
Yeah.
But I think I still have this publicist's email address, so maybe I'll reach out to him and see if he'll
do it.
He'll try to come on. And he seems, I mean, I don't know if have you heard his podcast? It's pretty good.
I have not.
With Tim Bonas. He's is like his best friend from childhood or junior high or whatever they say.
That's lovely.
In England. And they have this album. It's called The Album Years, and they look at records from, I think it's like the mid 60s to around I think their cutoff is maybe the 90s, somewhere in there, maybe 2000s, somewhere in that realm. But
Well, that's
they've
just
just,
rude. The album years continue. People have
they
not
do
stopped
continue,
making them.
but they are very upfront about the fact that new music for them is foreign territory, and they can't talk as knowledgeably about the newer music than they can the older ones. They've just done like a 4-part. I think they could do like a 5-part series on 1982, and that was really good. I was like,
I
wow,
bet.
you guys have a lot to say about these records, and some of them I've known of them just because I have them in my collection, and some of them I don't know. I went back and listened to them. I thought, oh, it's kind of interesting, but it's
Well,
a good
hit him
pod.
up. And while you're at it, reach out to Susanna Hoffs. She's promoting a new old record right now.
Oh, a new old record?
It's called The Lost Album.
Oh.
It was recorded in the late 90s. And
was it shelved?
Shelved. I think
Oh.
it was shelved partly, if not mostly, because the Bangles reunited. And she felt like she had to do one or the other. And so it's just been collecting dust ever since. But I think the personnel are largely the same as the group that helped her make her mostly unloved 1996 solo album, the self-titled one, the one that has her cover of All I Want by
Right.
Lightning Seeds.
That's not When I Was a Boy, was it? Is that
No, that was the first one. And I think
The
there's
first
another
one, okay.
lost album between that and the self-titled one. So there are all kinds of things you could ask her. And you could tell her, you read this book and you know all the crap she went through as a young recording artist.
Should I really spotlight a couple quick ones?
Do it.
All right. This one I've had on my shelf forever, and I apologize to Greg Renoff, but I have not read his Van Halen book yet. I plan on it. This one, Liz Phair, has gotten pretty good reviews. And then the last one, which I tried to read, and I'm having trouble with this one, is Elvis Costello's book. I don't know what it is about this one, but I like his music, so I'm committed to trying to finish this one. So that's on.
You don't know what the issue is. You don't know why you're not enjoying it.
Just wasn't into it.
All right. That's how I feel about most of his records.
Maybe I should fast forward to the albums that I do like by Costello and see what he has to say about those instead of worrying about, at 3, I pedaled my track. And that's when I found rhythm, Hey, Jeff, this has been fun. Thank you so much for hanging out with me and talking books about music. Yeah, this was a good conversation. And that's it for the episode of the Planet LP podcast. And thank you so much for listening. And do me a favor, share this episode with your friends, family, coworkers, acquaintances, whoever. If they're music fans, they might dig this podcast. And if you want to get in touch with me, you can at ted@planetlp.com. Until next time, take care, and I'll be talking to you soon.